I'm Susan Farrington, MDC Natural History Biologist for the Ozark region. My job is to know where the rarest plants, animals, and communities are and to help them make sure we manage them well. I spend a lot of time fighting exotic invasive plants, and I'm here tonight to help you identify and kill invasive plants in your yard or property. First, a reminder about why we should care about exotic invasive plants. For example, honeysuckle is junk food for wildlife. Our native birds need berries high in sugar content in the summer, but in the fall they need high fat and protein to power their migration. Bush honeysuckle is just pure sugar at the wrong time of year. Monocultures of one invasive plant eliminate all the native plants that provide so many different foods for our pollinators and birds throughout the growing season. The lower nesting heights, absence of sharp thorns, and different branching patterns can allow predators easier access to birds' nests built in exotic plants. Although rare, sometimes an invasive plant can kill wildlife directly. Spotted knapweed has thin, bare stems at ground level in winter, so it increases runoff and sediment to our rivers and lakes. It isn't wrong to grow a few exotic plants in your garden. For example, I do love my lilac bush, but be sure that they are the kind that will stay put. If their seed or fruit is readily carried by animals or the wind, they will eventually end up in a natural area, even if you live in the heart of the city. Even if they don't spread, exotic plants aren't as useful to our native birds and pollinators as our native species are, so please try to grow mostly native species. And especially, please banish these plants from your landscape: autumn olive, barberry, burning bush, bush honeysuckle, butterfly bush, Callery pear, golden rain tree, mimosa, princess tree, privet, tree of heaven, Japanese honeysuckle, Asian bittersweet, winter creeper, purple loosestrife, and Asian species of ornamental grasses. If your yard or property has these nasty plants, what do? We'll look at several methods of getting rid of them. Pulling them by hand is possible with smaller plants or smaller invasions. It has the advantage of being environmentally friendly, offering immediate gratification, and is easy for kids to help too. Disadvantages: it's very labor intensive. It may disturb the soil depending on the size of the plants and roots, and it's more difficult in dry or rocky soil. A pull bar, such as the polar bear, makes it possible to pull surprisingly large shrubs. It's hard work and isn't as efficient as spraying or even cutting and treating, but it is definitely more satisfying. Easier species to pull include garlic mustard, young shrubs, spotted knapweed, and Japanese stiltgrass. Harder species to pull include Sericea lespedeza. It's almost impossible to get the roots out of the ground unless the ground is very soft, and most woody shrubs and vines. You can pull just about anything if you have the right equipment. Foliar spraying is far less labor intensive than pulling, and you can treat a larger area, but there is certainly risk of accidental harm to other plants or animals, and there is personal exposure to herbicide to consider. When using any herbicide, be sure to read the label carefully and follow all recommendations. Every chemical is given a rating. Caution is least dangerous and danger is most dangerous. Read and follow the personal protective equipment section, the user safety recommendations, the environmental hazards section, and the directions for use. I always wear heavy nitrile gloves, not the lightweight latex medical exam type gloves. I wear long sleeves and pants if I'm spraying anything. Safety goggles are important to protect your eyes, and a wide-brimmed hat is also really helpful. A quick word about home remedies. Many folks adverse to the use of chemicals think it is safer to use things like vinegar or salt or soap solutions for killing weeds or pests. Please understand that these are chemicals too, and just because salt is safe for us to consume in small quantities, that does not make it safe to use to kill weeds. Salt is actually highly toxic and very long-lasting in our soils, killing many soil invertebrates and even larger animals. Household vinegar is generally not strong enough to be effective, and vinegar that is strong enough would be very hazardous to handle. There is no such thing as a safe herbicide, but using an appropriate herbicide very carefully and using the least amount necessary can sometimes be the safest option for both you and the environment, so long as all directions are followed. You can find a lot on the internet extolling the dangers of Roundup, otherwise known as glyphosate. Again, no herbicide is safe, including Roundup, and I'm not advocating its large-scale use here. But it is safer than most of the other herbicides, and it does not spread through the soil to our rivers and drinking water. However, it is non-selective, killing most plants it contacts, leaving empty space for exotic plants to reinvade. Ready-to-use formulations are okay for spraying, but are not strong enough for treating cut stumps. Triclopyr is a selective herbicide that kills broadleaf plants but doesn't harm grasses, but it can be more volatile and more toxic than glyphosate, so use caution and follow label instructions. Milestone is a more selective herbicide that is particularly good for treating spotted knapweed while leaving many other plants unharmed. It is expensive, but a tiny bit goes a long way. If you have a large infestation of knapweed, this can be helpful. Glyphosate formulations usually come with surfactant mixed in, but if you're using any other chemical, you should add a non-ionic surfactant when foliar spraying, typically at 0.5%. This helps to stick the herbicide to the leaves and to spread it on the leaf surface, making the herbicide treatment much more effective. I also always use a dye to mark my chemical. Dye allows you to see what you've treated, it lets you know if you've accidentally gotten any on you, and it lets you know when you have cleared out your sprayer of the chemical in it. I like the Steel SG20 sprayer. I'm not particularly fond of solo sprayers, which can leak all over you if their diaphragm fails. All backpack sprayers have air holes in the lid, so never lean over with a sprayer on your back or you may get herbicide dribbling down on you. If you need to pick something up off on the ground, when wearing a backpack sprayer, you must squat straight down with your knees bent. Choose your weather conditions carefully. Spray when winds are calm and when temperatures are not excessive. Early mornings and evenings are often good. The hourly graph available on the National Weather Service forecast page is really helpful to me. The graph shows temperature in the upper section. This shows a high of 67 and a dew point of 55. The second section shows your steady wind speed, gusts, and also direction of wind. The flags on the steady wind line show the intensity of the wind. The lines themselves show the direction. These winds are strong 17-mile-per-hour steady winds from the southwest and gusts as high as 26. These winds are steady 8-mile-per-hour south winds with no strong gusts, but still a bit high for spraying. And the third section shows the chance of precipitation, important to know when you are getting ready to spray. This shows a 10% chance of rain, increasing to 18%. A lot of information is packed into this graph. Timing for spraying is crucial. Spray during the right part of a plant's life cycle. Don't spray right before rain is expected. If you're spraying in early morning, wait for the dew to dry. Spray to cover the leaves, but not to the point of runoff. More is not better. Use the correct amount of herbicide at the right dilution. Overdoing it just burns the foliage off and does not give it a chance to translocate the herbicide to the roots to actually kill the plant. And spray when the plants are happy. A heat or drought-stressed plant closes its stomata and does not absorb the herbicide well. For some species, you can clip and treat the stems. I have used this when treating purple loosestrife in a high-quality wetland. I simply clipped its stems and squirted a small amount of glyphosate on the cut stem. The plant died while leaving all the native vegetation surrounding it unharmed. If you're treating woody stems, it's important to cut them low to the ground and to ensure that you treat all of the stems. This can be done at any time of the year except when the sap is rising from the roots. This time period varies by species, but occurs sometime between late winter and early spring. To test to see if the sap is rising, cut just one stem and wait at least 15 to 20 minutes. If that cut stump is soaking wet after 20 minutes, that means the sap is rising and it will push any herbicide up and off the stump. Wait several weeks before cutting and treating. Also, if using a water-based solution, do this only when temperatures are above freezing. Oil-based solutions can be used in freezing conditions as long as there is no snow or ice on the stump. The buckthorn blaster is a very handy tool for treating cut stems or stumps. It is small and easy to carry, especially for treating that one lone invasive you see when you're out hiking. You can find it easily by Googling buckthorn blaster. Be sure to get the tip removal tool. You'll need it to remove the wick tip to refill the container. By the way, the buckthorn is referring to glossy buckthorn, which is an exotic invasive. It's a problem up north, not in our state so much. And we have Carolina buckthorn, which is a native and is not an exotic invasive. You can also make a large kill stick from PVC pipe and a floor finish applicator pad. Herbicide in the stick wicks onto the stem or cut stump. There are instructions online for making them. They are good for treating a lot of stumps or stems without having to bend down, but I find them a little cumbersome to carry through the woods. For cut stump treatment, I prefer to use any product with triclopyr as its active ingredient, and I prefer oil-based products because they don't need to be applied instantly after cutting. Brand names include Remedy, which you mix with basil oil, or ready-to-use Brush Killer, Pathfinder, Crossbow, etc. Water-based herbicides must be applied within minutes of the fresh cut being made. Glyphosate at a 25% solution is relatively safe. I don't care for Tordon RTU. It is readily available and inexpensive, but it has a tendency to travel in the soil and through the roots, such that it can kill or damage a nice oak tree that is near that woody shrub you're trying to kill. When cutting larger trees, you only have to treat the outside of the stump, which is the live cambium layer. The inner wood is no longer alive and is only there to provide structure to the tree. Basal bark treatment is the application of herbicide to the bottom foot or so of a woody stem. It is less work than cutting and treating and uses less herbicide than foliar spraying. It can also be done in winter, but it uses more herbicide than cut stump treatment, and it only works for plants with relatively smooth bark. Be sure to get all the sides of the stem treated, but try to avoid wetting the soil at the base of the tree. You can use basal bark treatment for autumn olive, mimosa, privet, young calorie pear, or young tree of heaven. Woody stems with rough bark don't work as well, including bush honeysuckle and most larger trees. Hack and squirt can be a very quick and useful method to kill stems 3 inches and larger. Make several cuts through to the cambium layer and apply herbicide to the cuts. It is the only method you should use to kill large specimens of tree of heaven. We'll cover more on that shortly. Prescribed fire is more of a tool to be paired with other treatments. Fire is helpful to clear out vines and brush to allow you better access, but it seldom does more than top kill an invasive exotic, and the burn will stimulate the roots and the seed bank. Vigorous resprouting is often the result. So use it to deliver a 1-2 punch. Follow up any burning with an herbicide treatment when the plants return. In some cases, biological controls might be our best hope for some of our worst invasives. Biological controls may be native organisms or exotic organisms brought from the country of origin to attack a particular species. But it's important to remember that they control but do not eradicate the species. I'm always leery about introducing any exotic pest, even for a good cause. There are many possibilities for unintended consequences, and we need to be as sure as we can that the exotic pest won't cause problems for our native species and ecosystems. That said, biological controls have been used for spotted knapweed for over 2 decades in some parts of the country, and with very good results. This shows a large reduction in Minnesota. It takes a lot of time to see results like this, but eventually large invasions can be reduced to a manageable size that can then be eradicated through spraying efforts. I've also read promising reports for a native verticillium wilt that affects tree of heaven. Hopefully it will soon be approved to give us a good tool for this particularly difficult species. Let's look at some of the priority species I think you might encounter and how I have dealt with them. Autumn olive is the devil. If you're going to burn an area, treat the olive first, as fire will make it resprout with a vengeance. I have been fighting serious invasions of this with cut and treat, foliar spray, and even a bullhog in some of the worst areas. Foliar spraying has been the most efficient method for me. I've had good success using 1% Garlon 4 or Remedy, plus 0.05% milestone and 0.5% non-ionic surfactant. Basil bark treatment can be effective, but only if you're using a backpack sprayer to apply it, as it is too labor intensive to individually treat its many multiple stems. Cut stump treatment is effective when treating individual large tree-like specimens, but laborious and not terribly effective for a colony of multiple smaller sprouts. There is one native look-alike to autumn olive that can fool me from a distance. Gumbomelia has slightly whitened leaf undersides, but autumn olive's leaf undersides are strongly silver and shiny and more pointed. Bush honeysuckle is spreading across our whole state, fanning out from urban areas and also from where we planted it on conservation areas, thinking it would be good wildlife habitat. A very closely related native plant to bush honeysuckle is buckbrush, also called coralberry. It is very common and is a somewhat weedy plant, often overly abundant in areas that have historically been overgrazed. But it is important winter food for deer and other animals. It doesn't grow as big as bush honeysuckle, and its leaves are smaller and less pointy. Young bush honeysuckle can be pulled up readily, and larger specimens can be pulled with the aid of a pull bar. The most efficient way to kill bush honeysuckle is to spray it with 4% glyphosate in the late fall after most natives have lost their leaves. The honeysuckle leaves can be yellowing when you spray, as long as they're still well attached to the plant. You can also spray it in spring with either 2% glyphosate or a triclopyr formulation. But don't use triclopyr in the late fall. It is completely ineffective then. Those same treatments work well for Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vine. This species is found all over the state in many habitats. I have sprayed this almost evergreen plant in early December with excellent results. It's also one of the few species that seems to be negatively affected by burning alone. Burning bush is rapidly becoming the new bush honeysuckle. It is spreading out from landscape plantings in cities and towns and is very shade tolerant, becoming a dense understory in the woods. It is a very prolific cedar. I've seen quite a bit of resprouting after cutting and treating with Garland 4 in basil oil. I'm wondering if maybe a 25 or 50% glyphosate solution would be more effective for this plant. We have also pulled a lot of it, but we will need to return to spray the thousands of tiny seedlings beneath the larger specimens we pulled. A native look-alike and landscape alternative to burning bush is the eastern wahoo. It is in the same genus as burning bush and also has beautiful fall color, although it's closer to pink than red. Its berries are particularly showy. The leaves are much larger, which you can see in the central photo here, where I was holding a stem of each just as they were leafing out in spring. Calorie pear is a horrible scourge all over Missouri, and like burning bush, it spreads out from the cities and towns. Basil bark or hack and squirt can work for young trees, but the bark is too thick for that on older specimens. Mostly we cut and treat stumps. Pulling is really hard, even for small specimens. Be sure not to spray our native serviceberry, which blooms at the same time. It has a different habit, much more horizontal growing instead of upright and pyramidal, and our native plum, which typically blooms a little bit after calorie pear, and it has very strong fragrance. So if you smell the flowers and they smell wonderful, let that plant be. If you smell the flowers and they stink, it's probably calorie pear. Mimosa is rapidly spreading in Missouri, particularly in the southern part of the state. Its seeds end up in gravel that is spread along county roads and highways. It also spreads from landscape plantings. Small specimens can be foliar sprayed with triclopyr, or large specimens can be cut and treated or basil barked. Princess tree resembles native catalpa, but the veins are different and it has huge opposite leaves, while catalpa has 3 leaves in a whorl. Princess tree spreads fast from thousands of wind-blown seeds, and seedlings grow so fast they look like a sunflower plant. I haven't killed very many of these, but cutting and treating should work well. Tree of heaven, or tree of hell as I prefer to call it, is becoming more common throughout our state. Its leaves stink strongly like burnt peanut butter when crushed or brushed. Tree of heaven has some native lookalikes, so be sure of what you have before you kill it. If the smell doesn't give it away to you, look closely at the leaves. Tree of heaven leaflets have smooth edges with the exception of a little point at the base of the leaflet near the stem. Smooth sumac has small teeth along the edges of its leaflets, and black walnut has even smaller teeth. Black walnut also has a pleasant and strong fragrance. And winged sumac has leaf matter along the leaf stalk, making it appear winged. Tree of heaven is one of the worst species to deal with. In addition to spreading all over by wind-blown seeds, its root system is extremely aggressive. I've learned the hard way that you do not want to cut and treat this species, as your treatment will not kill the roots and it will cause it to resprout with a vengeance, as seen in this photo. To kill larger specimens, hack and squirt is the best method. If needed, you can cut the dead tree 6 to 12 months later. Smaller specimens should be foliar sprayed with either glyphosate, triclopyr, or both. Basil bark treatment can also work for smaller specimens. Privet is another species that has come to us from backyards everywhere. It is rapidly expanding in southern states especially, but is doing more and more in Missouri. I haven't treated this one a lot, but cut and treat or pulling young specimens works. I suspect it would be a great candidate for late fall or early winter foliar spraying with glyphosate, as it is almost evergreen. Asian bittersweet is a serious problem and difficult to tackle. It becomes a strangling, smothering mess which is difficult to even walk through, and it climbs high into the trees, often in remote locations. Spraying the plants on the ground seems to have no effect on the vines high up in the trees. You'll need to cut and treat the largest of those vines and foliar spray everything else. Our native bittersweet, seen in the lower right-hand corner, has fruits only at the ends of the stems and has darker orangish red bracts on the outside of the fruits. Asian bittersweet fruits, seen in the upper right-hand corner, they occur all along the stem and they have yellow bracts. Kudzu is the vine that ate the South, but it's traveling further and further north these days. Many folks mistake native vines that can also swallow trees for kudzu. To be sure it really is kudzu, look for the huge leaves. Each leaf has 3 leaflets, and each individual leaflet can be as large as your hand. Also look for the yellowish brown hairs on young stems. You'll have to use foliar treatment for this a very aggressive vine, and the best time to spray is midsummer to late summer or very early fall. I use Transline, a legume-specific herbicide that does little or no damage to the trees I have to spray high up into. It's important to have a high-pressure sprayer and get way up high, coating all of the leaves. If you have this on your property, contact me and we'll see if we can get you some help. Some follow-up treatment will still be required for the biggest of the vines. Tubers can be cut and treated, or you can foliar spray the resprouts. I haven't personally had to deal a lot with English ivy, periwinkle, or winter creeper, but they are all formidable. Foliar spray in spring, when their waxy leaves are least protected, is advised. Garlic mustard is a species of moist, shady areas, particularly along streams and rivers. Because its seed readily spreads in the water, it can be impossible to control if you can't control the upstream source. Where you decide to treat it, you can pull it and bag it, but if you do pull it, you must bag the plant and remove the plants, as blooming plants just left laying on the ground will still go on to form viable seed. You can also spray the basil rosettes in fall or winter with glyphosate. Japanese stiltgrass is an annual grass that invades the same habitats as garlic mustard, although it will also live in moister areas in full sun. Just like garlic mustard, control is virtually impossible if you can't control the upstream source for this one. I prioritize its treatment only in high-quality, isolated sinkhole pond wetlands where flooding isn't a factor. I like post-herbicide, which is grass-specific. It can be sprayed at low enough concentrations that it doesn't typically hurt our native perennial grasses, but it isn't approved near water, so there you would have to use an aquatic formulation of glyphosate if you spray it at all. Since it goes to seed in later fall, I spray it in late August to mid-September to ensure there isn't time for new plants to come up and go to seed after spraying. Musk thistle likes to fill in bare ground, and it is especially bad after a drought year. It is a biennial, blooming, germinating one season, blooming the next, and then it dies. There are some natural biocontrols existing out there that help to keep it in check. Best time to treat it is in the basal rosette stage or early bolting stage. If it's already bloomed and gone to seed, there is no point in doing anything unless you physically remove the seeds before they're released. Bull thistle is also a biennial and is treated the same way. Again, it favors disturbed or overgrazed soils. However, be careful. There are several native thistles out there, so look closely at the underside of the leaves. Our exotic thistles will be roughly the same color top and bottom of the leaf, so they'll be green on both sides of the leaf. Whereas the leaf undersides of our native thistles are usually strongly whitened. Our native thistles are very important for a large number of pollinators, and goldfinches require them for nesting material and food. They feed their babies the seeds from thistles. Please don't kill our native thistles. Teasel has much the same life cycle as thistles, and like them, the best time to spray is in the rosette stage or before it begins to bloom. I don't have a lot of experience with this one, so I'm not sure of the best herbicide to recommend. With spotted knapweed, the best foliar chemical control is the herbicide Milestone, which is reasonably selective for this species. The basal rosettes can be sprayed during the winter on milder days. If you're spraying in the growing season and Sericea lespedeza is also present, you can mix Remedy and Milestone together to kill both species. Unfortunately, Remedy is not effective in killing knapweed, and Milestone is not effective in killing Sericea. You're probably all familiar with Sericea lespedeza. Its seed bank can remain viable for 20 years or more, making it very difficult to eradicate. Persistence is the key. Fire stimulates the seed bank and doesn't kill adults, but it can be used if it is paired with follow-up spraying after the burn. But please be aware of the native slender lespedeza and try not to spray it. It doesn't branch as much as Sericea, it has pink flowers, and the venation is different if you hold a leaflet up to the light. Sericea has fishbone-like venation, whereas our native has wavy veins. To treat Sericea lespedeza, I typically use a 1% Remedy solution and add some non-ionic surfactant at 0.5%. Or is it 1%? Now I'm forgetting, but it's 1 ounce per gallon, so it's less than 1%, I apologize. 1 ounce per gallon for spot spraying. Poison hemlock is a large plant with ferny leaves, with very ferny leaves, sturdy smooth stems that have a whitish coating and purple spots. Its fruits are smooth. It is extremely poisonous and is also irritating to the skin. So wear gloves and avoid contacting it directly if possible. It is best controlled in spring before it bolts and goes to seed. It is a biennial, so once it's gone to seed, it's going to die, so treatment is useless at that point. Focus instead on spraying the seedlings when they emerge in late summer or fall, or in late winter, early spring. There are a number of lookalikes to poison hemlock. One is Queen Anne's lace, also an exotic, but thankfully not nearly as troublesome in general, and it's very common. Many people think it's native, but it isn't. It is generally shorter with much thinner stems that are slightly hairy, and its leaves aren't nearly as large or ferny. The finished flowers are very distinctive. They curl up inwards after blooming. Another lookalike is hedge parsley, yet another exotic, but again not as troublesome as poison hemlock. It is very dainty looking with smaller flowers, very fern-like leaves, smaller stems with minutely tiny stiff hairs, and seeds that have Velcro-like sticking power. There's also water hemlock, another toxic plant, but one that is native to Missouri and is found along streams and in our wetlands. Livestock will not usually feed on any form of hemlock, but in severe drought conditions they may be tempted, and poisoning of cattle has occurred. Although certainly not desirable in a pasture, this is a plant that is used by our native pollinators. Its leaves are larger and much less fern-like. Its stems are smooth and have very little purple. Every so often there's a news story about giant hogweed, a toxic exotic invasive that causes extreme skin reaction, which isn't yet known from Missouri. Thus far, it is only found scattered in some far northern states, and it is unmistakably huge. You could not confuse this one. But every year, someone gets a bad skin reaction from a plant, and a news story says it was from giant hogweed. The culprit instead may be wild parsnip, another exotic that can cause serious skin burns as well. And it is found in Missouri, particularly in southwest and northern Missouri. It's not particularly common, but it is out there. Both of these species have very different leaves than poison hemlock. The leaves are not lacy and they have much larger lobes. Do not touch these. Johnson grass is considered a noxious weed and is found all over in disturbed habitats. It has a very strong spreading root system. Spraying it with glyphosate is less than ideal because it often doesn't totally kill the roots and it leaves bare ground to be colonized. I prefer Outrider, which is specific to warm season grasses. It's relatively effective, but a big invasion will require multiple years of treatment. Outrider is also very expensive and probably not practical if you just have a little Johnson grass. If you just have a little, use glyphosate and be very persistent when it tries to resprout. But if you have a lot, I would strongly recommend getting some Outrider. So this is a power line on Little Black Conservation Area. Johnson grass, right? Wrong. This is a native grass called silver plume grass. There are two native look-alike grasses to Johnson grass. Although they all look very different in bloom, vegetatively they can easily be mistaken for one another. So here's how to distinguish them. All three are large grasses with whitened midveins. First, look at the base of the stem to see if it's rounded, rounded or flattened. If it's flattened with a strong folded edge, it's native gamma grass. If it's rounded, look next at the base of the leaf where it meets the stem. If it's smooth with little or no hair, it's Johnson grass. Native silver plume grass has long silky hairs at the leaf base. Gamma grass blooms early and has corn kernel-like seeds. Johnson grass blooms in June or July, and silver plume doesn't bloom until September. Although the battle against invasives seems overwhelming, I leave you with these words of inspiration. Do not despair, my comrade in arms, for if we fall, bloodied and spent, before the siege of weeds, we fall as warriors. And if we prevail in a battle or a war, or after years of conflicted toil, we prevail still as warriors. But if we do nothing, discard the beetles and tanks, and grow fat and helpless, complacent of the advance, we only despair. Thank you, and if you have more questions, concerns, feel free to contact me at my email listed here.